I found my grandson Michael slumped against the emergency exit door of the Hartwell building at 6:47 inches the morning. His white dress shirt was soaked through with blood, his briefcase scattered across the concrete, papers fluttering in the cold Chicago wind. When I dropped to my knees beside him, my hands shaking so badly I could barely check his pulse, his eyes flickered open, just barely. "Grandma," he whispered, his voice so faint I had to press my ear to his lips. "It was Jonathan," he said. "Said people like us don't belong in their tower." Then his eyes rolled back and he went still. I screamed until a security guard came running. The ambulance arrived in 7 minutes. I rode with him to Northwestern Memorial, holding his cold hand and praying to a God I hadn't spoken to in years. My name is Eleanor Price, and I'm 68 years old. I spent 41 years as an executive assistant at Hartwell Financial Group, one of the largest investment firms in the Midwest. I typed letters for men who moved millions. I scheduled meetings that decided the fates of companies. I knew where every skeleton was buried because I was the one who filed the paperwork. When I retired 3 years ago, they gave me a gold watch and a handshake. Gerald Hartwell himself, the CEO, smiled for a photograph with me that ran in the company newsletter. "Eleanor has been the backbone of this organization," he said. What he didn't say was that backbones are invisible. You don't notice them until something breaks. Michael survived the first surgery. Punctured lung, 3 broken ribs, fractured skull, severe internal bleeding. The doctor, a young woman with tired eyes, told me if he'd been found 20 minutes later, he would have bled out on that concrete step. My daughter Patricia flew in from Denver. We sat in the ICU waiting room together, drinking bad coffee and not sleeping. The police came on the second day. Detective Raymond Foster, mid-50s, built like a former football player gone soft. He had a notebook and a skeptical expression. "Mrs. Price, your grandson mentioned someone named Jonathan before he lost consciousness. Do you know who that might be?" "Jonathan Hartwell," I said. "Gerald Hartwell's son. Michael works in the accounting department at Hartwell Financial. Jonathan is being groomed to take over the company." Detective Foster's pen stopped moving. Hartwell Financial, the Hartwell family. Yes, everyone in Chicago knew the Hartwells. 3 generations of old money, the kind that funded hospital wings and had their names carved into university buildings. Gerald's father, Robert Hartwell, had built the firm from nothing in the 1960s. Now they occupied the top floors of a building with their name on it, looking down at the city like gods surveying their kingdom. "We'll need to bring him in for questioning," Detective Foster said. "Good luck." The Hartwells have more lawyers than most firms have employees. I was right, of course. Within 8 hours, Jonathan Hartwell appeared at the hospital with 3 attorneys in suits that cost more than my car. They produced alibis, witness statements, security footage showing Jonathan at a charity gala until 2 a.m. The timeline was tight, but possible. Without Michael's testimony, they couldn't prove anything. And when Michael finally woke up 5 days later, he couldn't remember anything after leaving work. The doctors said it was common with head trauma. His brain was protecting itself from the horror. Patricia wanted to take him back to Denver immediately. But Michael, stubborn as his grandfather, insisted he needed to return to work. "I can't let them think they scared me off," he said. "I can't let them win." My heart broke watching him. 26 years old, summa cum laude from Northwestern, working his way up in a company that had never promoted anyone from our side of the city to a real position of power. He'd gotten hired through merit, not connections. He believed the system would reward hard work and talent. I'd spent 4 decades watching that system crush people like us. "What did Jonathan say to you?" I asked him one afternoon when Patricia was getting food from the cafeteria. "Before you lost consciousness?" Michael's brow furrowed. "I told the police I don't remember." "I'm not the police. I'm your grandmother. And I've worked for that family longer than you've been alive." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I remember fragments. Jonathan and his father were there. Gerald. They said they'd found discrepancies in the books. They accused me of embezzlement. But Grandma, I didn't steal anything. I found something. I found irregularities in the pension fund accounts. Money being moved, redirected. I was going to report it to the SEC. Did you tell anyone?" "Just Jonathan. I thought he'd want to know. I thought maybe someone was stealing from the company, and he'd want to fix it." Michael's laugh was bitter. He called me into his office that evening, said his father wanted to discuss something privately. They offered me money to keep quiet. $200,000 to forget what I'd seen and resign. When I refused, he touched the bandage on his head. Gerald told Jonathan to handle it, make it look like a mugging gone wrong. I sat very still. My hands were folded in my lap, but inside, something was turning to steel. "Did you tell Detective Foster this?" I tried. His partner called me back, said without evidence, it was my word against theirs. Jonathan's lawyers are already claiming I'm making false accusations to cover up my own embezzlement. They're going to press charges against me, Grandma. They're going to destroy my career and send me to prison for something they did. This was exactly how the Hartwells operated. I'd seen it before, many times. People who got in their way simply disappeared from the industry. Reputations destroyed. Careers ended. Lives ruined. And everyone who worked there knew it, which is why no one ever spoke up. But what the Hartwells didn't know, what Gerald would never have suspected, was that I had been paying attention for 41 years. The week after Michael was released from the hospital, I drove to see my sister Louise. She's 72, lives in the same house in Oak Park where we grew up. Our mother passed 15 years ago, but before she died, she gave me something she'd been collecting her entire career as a legal secretary at a firm that handled Hartwell business. "It's insurance," she'd told me, "for when the powerful forget that the rest of us are human beings too." Louise opened the door in her housecoat, hair wrapped in a scarf. "Ellie, I heard about Michael. How is he?" "Alive. But they're going to frame him for embezzlement, Lou. They're going to put my grandson in prison to cover up their own crimes." My sister's face went pale. "You're not thinking about using Mama's files." "I'm not thinking about it. I'm going to do it." Louise led me up to her attic. Dust motes floated in the weak light from a single window. She pulled out a filing cabinet we'd moved from our mother's apartment after she passed. Inside were folders spanning nearly 50 years. Bank statements, memos, letters, photographs, audio cassettes our mother had recorded secretly long before anyone thought to worry about such things. Our mother, Rose Chen, had worked for Morrison & Associates from 1965 to 1998. Morrison & Associates handled all of Hartwell Financial's legal work during its formative years. Rose had seen everything. The SEC violations that were quietly settled. The pension fund that was raided in 1987 and never reported. The business partner, William Crane, who died in a car accident in 1979 after threatening to go public about accounting fraud. The witnesses who were paid off. The regulators who were bribed. Rose had documented it all, not because she planned to use it, but because she understood that someday, someone might need proof that the Hartwells were not the philanthropists they pretended to be. "Mama always said the Hartwells would destroy themselves eventually," Louise said softly. "They just needed someone to open the door. They tried to kill my grandson. They're going to frame him for their own crimes. The door is open." I spent the next week in Louise's dining room, going through every document. I created timelines. I cross-referenced names and dates. I found connections between crimes committed in the 1970s and practices that were clearly still happening today. The pension fund irregularities Michael had discovered were just the latest chapter in a 50-year pattern of theft and fraud. But historical documents weren't enough. I needed someone who could connect the past to the present. Someone who understood how to turn evidence into action. I found her through an old colleague, a paralegal named David who had worked with me at Hartwell for 20 years before retiring. He knew a lawyer named Sandra Okonkwo, a former federal prosecutor who now specialized in whistleblower cases. She'd grown up on the South Side, put herself through law school, and built her career taking down the kind of people who thought they were above the law. We met at a coffee shop in Hyde Park. Sandra was in her early 50s, with close-cropped gray hair and reading glasses perched on her nose. She listened to my story without interrupting, then spent 2 hours going through the documents I'd brought. "Mrs. Price," she said finally, "do you understand what you have here? I know it's evidence of criminal activity. It's more than that. This is a pattern of racketeering that spans half a century. Securities fraud, embezzlement, obstruction of justice, possibly manslaughter in the case of William Crane. If I can prove this pattern continues to the present day, this is RICO territory." "I don't know what that means." Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. It's a federal law designed to dismantle criminal enterprises. If your mother's documents can be authenticated and connected to current Hartwell operations, the FBI could potentially seize the entire company. How long would that take? Years. Federal investigations move slowly, especially against targets with this much money and these many connections. My grandson doesn't have years. They're going to charge him with embezzlement. His arraignment is in 6 weeks. Sandra took off her glasses and cleaned them thoughtfully. There might be a faster path. Let me make some calls. 3 days later, Sandra came back with news. She had a contact at the FBI Financial Crimes Unit who had been investigating Hartwell Financial for suspected securities violations for 2 years, but they'd never had enough to move forward. The pension fund issues Michael discovered were exactly what they needed. Combined with your mother's historical documentation, they have probable cause to open a full investigation, Sandra explained. More importantly, they can use the threat of investigation as leverage. Leverage for what? A meeting. The FBI agent, Marcus Webb, is willing to bring Gerald and Jonathan Hartwell in for a formal interview. He'll make it clear they have substantial evidence of ongoing criminal activity and historical crimes. Sometimes when powerful men realize they're not untouchable, they make deals. What kind of deals? Jonathan pleads guilty to aggravated assault. He serves real prison time. Gerald cooperates with the investigation into current financial practices. In exchange, the historical crimes stay sealed unless needed for prosecution. Your grandson's name is cleared. The embezzlement charges disappear. It wasn't perfect justice. William Crane was still dead, and his family would never know the truth. The pension fund victims from 1987 would never get their money back. But it was something. It was enough. When? I asked. Next week. But Eleanor, you need to understand the risks. The Hartwells will be furious. They might try to retaliate. They have resources you can't imagine. I thought about Michael's bloody shirt, about the bandages on his head, about Gerald Hartwell calling people like us disposable. Let them try. The meeting took place on a Tuesday morning in the federal building downtown. Agent Marcus Webb was in his late 40s, African American, with the calm demeanor of a man who had seen everything and was no longer impressed by wealth or power. He'd arranged for us to use a conference room with recording equipment and one-way glass. Sandra and I sat in the observation room. Michael was back in Denver with Patricia, safe. Louise was at home, anxious but determined. Detective Foster had been invited to attend as a representative of Chicago PD, which added weight to the proceedings. Gerald Hartwell arrived first with 4 attorneys. He was 63, silver-haired, with the kind of permanent tan that comes from winters in Palm Beach. He walked into the room like he owned it, which, until today, he essentially did. Jonathan came separately with his own lawyer. He was 31, good-looking in that generic way that comes from expensive grooming and no real hardship. When he saw his father, something flickered across his face. Fear, maybe, or guilt. Agent Webb didn't waste time. He laid out copies of documents from my mother's files on the table, bank statements, photographs, transcripts of the audio recordings. These materials, he said calmly, document approximately 50 years of criminal activity by the Hartwell family and Hartwell Financial Group. Securities fraud, pension fund theft, bribery of federal officials, obstruction of justice, and strong evidence suggesting involvement in the death of William Crane in 1979. Gerald's lead attorney started to object. Agent Webb held up his hand. I'm not finished. We also have testimony from Michael Chen that your son, Jonathan Hartwell, and you, Mr. Hartwell, conspired to assault him on December 3rd of this year. Mr. Chen has recovered his memory of the attack and is prepared to testify that you, Gerald, ordered your son to handle it and make it look like a mugging after Mr. Chen refused payment to remain silent about financial irregularities he had discovered. This is preposterous, Gerald said, but his voice was less steady than before. My lawyers will. Your lawyers will listen, Agent Webb interrupted. Because here's what happens if you don't cooperate. I open a formal FBI investigation into Hartwell Financial. I subpoena 50 years of records. I bring in forensic accountants. I interview every employee, every client, every person who's ever done business with your family. And when I'm done, I guarantee I'll find enough to charge you with multiple federal crimes. You're threatening me? I'm offering you a choice. Your son pleads guilty to aggravated assault. He serves a minimum of 12 years in state prison. You cooperate fully with our investigation into current financial practices and pay restitution to the pension fund victims. In exchange, we don't pursue charges related to the historical crimes. We don't make these documents public. We don't destroy your family's legacy completely. And if we refuse, then I arrest you both today. Everything comes out. Every crime, every cover-up, every dirty secret your family has buried for 50 years. Your company collapses. Your reputation is destroyed. And you both spend what's left of your lives in federal prison. Through the one-way glass, I watched Gerald Hartwell's face change. The arrogance drained away, replaced by something I'd never seen in 41 years of working for him. Fear. Real fear. Jonathan was staring at the table, not meeting anyone's eyes. "How did you get these documents?" Gerald asked quietly. Agent Webb smiled slightly. "The women you didn't think were important enough to notice were paying very close attention. The negotiation took 6 hours. The lawyers examined every document. Sandra presented additional evidence, including contemporary newspaper articles that corroborated my mother's accounts. Detective Foster provided evidence from Michael's case, medical records, and witness statements that contradicted the Hartwells' alibis. In the end, they took the deal. Jonathan pleaded guilty to aggravated assault with intent to cause great bodily harm. The judge sentenced him to 15 years, with possibility of parole after 10. Gerald agreed to cooperate with the FBI investigation, which ultimately revealed massive securities fraud and pension fund theft spanning decades. He avoided prison, but paid $62 million in fines and restitution. The company was restructured under court supervision. The Hartwell family, which had dominated Chicago's financial world for 3 generations, was finally brought to account. The embezzlement charges against Michael were dropped. He moved back to Chicago eventually, took a job with the SEC investigating financial crimes. He still has headaches sometimes and his left arm never quite healed right, but he's alive. He's building a career helping other people fight the kind of corruption that almost killed him. Patricia finally stopped blaming herself for not seeing the danger sooner. Louise tends her garden and visits our mother's grave every Sunday. And me, I'm 68 years old. I still get up early every morning, still read the financial news, still pay attention to what powerful people think no one notices. On the first anniversary of finding Michael bleeding on that concrete step, Louise and I took our mother's files and donated them to the Chicago History Museum. We worked with archivists to create a proper collection, properly preserved and cataloged, available to researchers studying corporate crime and white-collar corruption in 20th century America. Because here's what people like the Hartwells never understood. Just because someone is typing your letters or filing your documents or scheduling your meetings doesn't mean they don't matter. It doesn't mean they're not watching. It doesn't mean they're not keeping records. My mother used to say that the difference between being wealthy and being powerful is patience. Wealthy people think they can buy anything, including silence. Powerful people understand that true power comes from information, from observation, from waiting for the exact right moment. She waited 50 years. I waited 41 years. And when the moment came, we were ready. People ask me sometimes if I feel guilty about what happened to the Hartwell family. If I regret destroying their company, their reputation, their legacy. I don't. They made a choice when they decided my grandson's life was worth less than their secrets. When they called people like us the help and assumed we were too stupid or too scared to ever fight back. When they thought they could beat a young man nearly to death and frame him for their own crimes, they forgot something important. They forgot that the people who keep the records, who file the documents, who answer the phones and schedule the meetings and clean up the messes, we see everything. We remember everything. And if you give us enough time, we will find a way to make you pay. Michael sits across from me now at Sunday dinners, recovered and rebuilding his life. When he asks me how I knew what to do, how I stayed so calm when everything was falling apart, I tell him what my mother told me. The most powerful people in any organization aren't the ones with their names on the door. They're the ones who know where all the secrets are hidden. They're the ones who are patient enough to wait. They're the ones who understand that the truth always comes out eventually. You just have to be ready when it does. That's it? He asks. Just patience and truth? That's it, I say. Patience and truth. The truth is the most powerful weapon in the world, Michael. It just takes time to load. Louise and I visit our mother's grave every Sunday after church. We bring flowers, fresh ones in summer and silk ones in winter. We tell her about Michael's new job, about the researchers who've used her documents to write papers about corporate corruption, about the other cases that have been opened because prosecutors now understand what the Hartwell empire really was. We tell her that her patience paid off, that her careful record-keeping became her legacy, that she mattered more than she ever knew. And sometimes, when the wind comes off Lake Michigan just right, I swear I can hear her voice. The same thing she used to tell us when we were girls, when we complained about having to work harder than everyone else just to be seen as half as good. The powerful forget that the powerless are watching. They forget that we remember. They forget that someday, somewhere, someone will be brave enough to tell the truth. She was right. She was always right. And in the end, that's all that matters. Not the money or the power or the buildings with your name on them. Just the truth. Just the patience to wait for the right moment. Just the courage to speak up when that moment finally comes. The Hartwells had everything except that, and in the end, it was their undoing. I'm 68 years old, and I've learned that justice moves slowly. It moves through filing cabinets and forgotten documents and the memories of people that powerful men dismiss as unimportant. It moves through generations, from mother to daughter to granddaughter, each one carrying the weight of truth until the time is right to set it down. The Hartwells thought they were building a dynasty. What they were really building was a case against themselves, documented by the women they never saw, preserved by the families they never valued, waiting for the moment when all their money and all their lawyers couldn't save them. That moment came on a cold December morning, when my grandson whispered a name and everything changed. Patience, my mother used to say. Patience and truth. She was right about that too.